Alex, tomorrow it is Friday,
It is.
and I think both you and I have been playing some dark games this week.
God, have we ever?
It's a little on the nose with I'm playing a game called Dark Souls, but I don't. I
Yeah.
mean more thematically. I
Yeah.
read your review before it went up of the Banner Saga,
hmm
and I was just you spent a lot of time talking about sort of the darkness that is just everywhere in that
Yeah.
video game, and it just really bummed me out by the end. But also, I was then very excited to play it.
I don't want to say that that game is like brutally depressing or unbearable in any way. It's just that it's a game about attrition. It's a game where you have to carry people across a vast icy wasteland, and you have to balance supplies with the need to fight. And I mean, again, it's basically Oregon Trail on just a much bigger scale.
That
And
that comparison made me laugh immediately. Now that it
yeah.
doesn't seem 100% accurate, but to invoke
There is
that,
literally no, because there is literally a joke in that game. There's a point where you hit that like you literally have to ford a river or caulk your wagons to get across the river. Like they are being not at all subtle about the fact that that game is basically Oregon Trail.
what's just nice about that comparison is that so many people have played that game, and that instantly communicates like everything about what you're trying to say. Like you could sit there and explain it as well, but Oregon Trail is just like an extraordinary shorthand for
Yeah,
I think I just like not only theme but mechanics.
it is a cultural touchstone. Damn it. And yeah, I mean it's like whatever, man. Viking mythology, Norse mythology, that shit ain't fun. That shit ain't about happy stuff happening all the time. It's about gods being slain and just abject misery and shit being set on fire in the icy wasteland, corpses floating down rivers and shit. Like, it's dark, it's messed up, and I liked that about it. I liked that it sounded like the whole game reminded me of like an Amon Amarth song, like that shit is pretty cool.
So is the Banner Saga sort of, mythologically speaking, sort of like you watch Game of Thrones, right?
Yes.
So is like Game of Thrones in which like yes, there are like elements of mysticism and some god stuff, and there's some weird magical things going on, but it's kind of grounded at least on a certain level about these sort of human characters. I mean, I know there's another race, but
Yeah.
like it's not like Lord of the Rings, right?
No, I think it's at somewhere in between the two. The two main races, I mean, are just humans and then giant humans with horns. It's
Okay.
like there's nothing too fantastical about that except that one is really large. It's when you start getting into like the stone demon stuff and the fact that there is kind of like a world-ending apocalypse kind of looming up in the north that it definitely there's a little bit of Game of Thrones in there, but it that's a little bit more mystical, I think, than even Game of Thrones does. But it's a balance, and the actual reality of what you're doing in most battles is you're running up with dudes with swords and axes and shit. There is not like you're not casting magic spells or there are dudes who can cast magic in that game, but there's like one of them. The rest of
Hmm.
the time, the rest of it is just like archers and axemen and spear dudes and all that stuff. So and the people who are magical are largely feared and treated as like a weird aberration in that universe. So
Okay, so this was a little bit like Game of Thrones in that respect. Like
yeah.
anyone that can, is sort of, involved with magic is kind of looked at with a weird eye, but also an immense amount of respect for being able to invoke such things.
Yeah, it definitely falls within that kind of that wheelhouse.
And are you a strategy guy all the time, or is this sort of like me, where like you just kind of like dip your toes in every once in a while, and the Banner Saga just kind of caught you?
Yeah, it really depends on the game. I'm not inherent like that's not the first genre I would go to, when looking for something new. And a lot of times those kinds of games just leave me feeling like they're just a lot of those strategy games feel kind of dry to me, and
Hmm.
they're not that exciting. But I think the combination of the art and the mythology behind this one, coupled with the fact that the battle system is smart without being overly complicated, was enough to kind of get me hooked into it.
Okay, so I feel like for a lot of people, XCOM was a game that brought them back into the strategy genre.
Yes.
That's what got me into it, sort of period. And then I played Fire Emblem, and I'm looking forward to playing the Banner Saga. Like so, like through the prism of XCOM, like how do you feel the Banner Saga is sort of like a stepping stone for someone that enjoyed XCOM and is maybe thinking about trying another one of these?
I mean, I would say that Banner Saga is an easier game than XCOM can be, certainly at its most intense. I think that I mean, the two games are very different in a lot of ways, but I think that the Banner Saga is, if you like strategy, I mean, there's no part of the Banner Saga I would not recommend. You know, other than the fact that it kind of ends on a real annoying cliffhanger. There's not much about it I didn't like. So, you know, depending on, I think if you're one of those like really crazy strategy heads who likes it really complicated and really hard, like the hard mode even of that game probably would not quite be enough for you. But
Hmm.
other than that, there's nothing about it that I would say would put anyone off unless you just really don't like Vikings for some reason.
Because like so the big strategic difference in how you play the Banner Saga versus I think how you think of other strategy games is that there is armor and normal health, right? Like there's
Hmm.
both of those, and the general strategy is to hit the armor so that you can do more damage once the armor's away. But obviously that strategy probably changes sometimes depending on what's going on.
Yeah, and the other thing that's kind of cool is that your health is also your strength rating. So when you upgrade your health, you're also upgrading the amount of damage you can deal to enemies. So that's kind of like a weird combination I had not seen before.
So do you upgrade strength separately at all, or is it
It's
pure
its
just
own
health?
stat, but it does both those things. And then armor is, on top of that, it's, like the amount of damage you can take.
Hmm. Is there permadeath in this game?
There are situations where there are characters that will die permanently, certainly.
Okay.
And there are situations where you can essentially lose the game. But when
Okay.
that happens, you can usually just go back to the last save or the last checkpoint and then jump back in, as opposed to having to start the whole damn game over, as far as I can tell. I only
Okay,
had
but
game over like once, and then I just jumped right back in from the last checkpoint. So
it's not like XCOM where you're like sort of building up soldiers and then losing them in battle, and then like that can really decimate you in the late game of XCOM.
no, it's not like that, but you will lose people in your party, including people that you have built up. It just
Mhm.
it depends less on the combat situations, because in those situations when people die, they're injured, so they operate at less strength the next time you put them out in the field.
Oh,
You
so
can
it's
put it
story
rested.
based.
Yeah, but there will be story situations depending on the choices you make that can lead to certain characters dying or living. So,
Hmm.
and that is all I'm going to say about that. So.
Hmm. Man, that art looks freaking amazing.
It's real good. It's a real good looking game, and I don't mind the fact that it's like a lot of the images are pretty static. Like there's animation in the battles and stuff, but everything else is pretty like, hey, the eyes moved and then the hands are moving a little bit, but mostly it's just these kind of static panning shots. But it all looks so good that it doesn't really matter. Like it works perfectly for what that game's trying to do.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about January and strategy games, but last year it was Fire Emblem Awakening. This year we've got the Banner Saga. Yeah, dude,
It's
it's
good
nice.
stuff.
Yeah,
And
and
I gotta.
it's kicking off. It's kicking off this year pretty well. This week was that, or I guess, yeah, this week. This week was
Mhm.
actually quite a few things came out. Especially if you start thinking about, Kickstarter
Mhm.
as a new funding platform, and what does that mean for the quality of games we're getting out of that. People seem pretty happy with the Banner Saga and Broken Age, even though Broken Age got split into two parts. I have not
Yeah.
played it yet, but by all accounts, people like that quite a bit. And it seems like Kickstarter is going to settle down in the way that every other game release method sort of settles down, which is some of the games are really good, some of the games are not so good, and some of them never come out.
Yeah, you just got to know. You got to research, and you got to be dutiful about what you're backing. But in the situations that I mean, I haven't backed any games personally on Kickstarter, just because I sort of prefer to kind of get things when everyone else gets it, just to sort of stay that one step removed from those sorts of things. But from a quality perspective, like I'm finding very little about the whole Kickstarter movement to find much fault with these days. When you look at something like Broken Age, which I was downloading before we started the show today, I'm going to play through this weekend, and stuff like Banner Saga, like. There's no reason why those games can't hang with the shit that studios are pouring millions of dollars into, or the indies or studios are making on their own. Like it seems like it is proving itself to be a completely viable and at least semi-reliable platform,
Yeah,
for for making games happen.
there's nothing about those two games that it seems like when you play them, if you didn't know that they were funded through crowdfunding, you would get that impression that they were any lesser than
Yeah.
normal games that come out, that's super awesome. Like that's really encouraging, and I think it was interesting to watch some of the weird stuff kind of play out. Double Fine trying to impose an embargo on Broken Age, which
Yeah.
is sort of how traditional media coverage is handled, and I think Double Fine was trying to have it both ways in a way that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. They were trying to, you know, give game writers access to the game, give them a chance to play it and write about it, not on a time crunch because they were releasing it at the same time they were giving it to backers. So that's normally, when an embargo is used correctly, an embargo is there for you to have time to get your thoughts together, for everything to come out at once, which means that there's a lot of interest in the game at the same time, which drives traffic. Like, it's supposed to be a beneficial thing for everyone in the most ideal scenario that it's used. And, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're sending out the game to tens of thousands of backers that are not used to embargoes, don't care about your embargo, and are going to talk about and stream that game in a way that, you've strung the press up in a way that they can't. So it was good to see them drop that, but I think wrinkles like that are kind of it might be a little bit of inside baseball, but also kind of interesting as this stuff starts to play out.
It's just shit people need to figure out. These people are trying different publishing models, different, like you said, in this case, different press embargo models, like trying to find ways to please the audience that will get their hands on the game, and also keep the press involved to make sure that people go and buy the game, when it actually comes out, I guess, on the 28th. And, I'm glad you actually gave that explanation the way you did, because I felt like I walked into that whole situation halfway through that conversation already happening. And I had to go back and read a whole bunch and be like, what the fuck is everyone yelling about? Like, why are Chris Remo and Justin McElroy going at each other on Twitter? What is happening?
I think it was one of those things where Double Fine was trying to protect the interests of itself and, its backers, and it's just one of those that, in a room, I bet it made a lot of sense, and then it's one of those rules that in practice just doesn't really work in the real world. And
right.
You know what? Double Fine listened. It got lifted. People wrote the reviews. Everything turned out just fine. And I'm also just thankful we don't really play in that game and have to worry about it.
For real. Like, I mean, whatever. It's not like there aren't times when we're trying to make embargoes for reviews and stuff. But I think the fact that we don't necessarily assign that level of importance to it, as long as it's more about getting through the game when you can, more than anything else, I'm kind of glad.
Yeah, me as well. Have you been playing anything else this week?
I started playing through Risk of Rain again, because I hadn't really played a whole lot of that since I got back, but I've been playing a couple of times over the last week just to kind of practice up in case you ever decide you want to put down Spelunky for a little while and jump back on that.
Yeah, I should.
Yeah.
Yes. I do want to play that game again, but yes, my time has been very. I'm actually going to start, I think maybe next week, ratcheting down the Spelunky streams. I still want to. I'm going to play every day. I'm going to do the daily challenge every day, but it consumes a lot of time every morning to set that up and then do it. Or maybe I'll just change it to where I'm just streaming the daily challenge alone on some days instead of like an hour of warm up before we do that. But yeah, I want to play more Risk of Rain because I've got these, Dark Souls, Spelunky, Risk of Rain. Sure, just add it to the pile. I'll play another one of those games. That's fine with me.
Why the hell not?
Yeah, so I'm deep in the thick of Dark Souls. I've been playing every single night. I've been playing till like 1 a.m. I'm pretty tired today because I've spent every night this week staying up till 1 playing Dark Souls. And the weirdest thing, tangential to Dark Souls, but what I've found about staying up late in my first transition back to winter is that it's not that I'm a morning person. I don't mind getting up in the morning. I can function just fine early in the morning, so that's not really a big thing for me. But getting out of bed in the winter is really hard. It's really hard. Like when your thermostat is, ours is set on a timer, and it starts like, getting warmer. I think around 8 o'clock. When it's like 58 in your apartment, like I hit my alarm way more often than I ever used to in like the last month.
No, it's like, you go full Homer Simpson. You're all wrapped up in a blanket, all, like a warm, toasty cinnamon bun, and you don't want to get out. There is no way you want to get out of that damn bed. I understand that.
Yeah.
I respect
So
that.
I don't know. So I've been staying up late playing Dark Souls. I'm not sure if I have much more to say than what I said on
Hmm.
Monday, except that I'm really enjoying it. Making progress. I made it out of this weird painting world, and I'm now through the. I don't remember. Do you remember when Justin McElroy made a music video about Dark Souls? He made a song about Dark Souls.
I remember that he did it. I don't really
Uh
remember
huh.
what happened in it. That it's been a while, so.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so he made a song about this section of the game called Honorlando, which is famous for being a breaking point for a lot of people.
Hmm.
There's a couple reasons for that. One are these giant knights that are like 3 times the size of the player character that just knock you the fuck around
Mm.
and are just brutal to deal with. There's a section called the Archers, which is
Hmm.
where you're kind of like running up the buttress of this castle, and there are 2 archers that are shooting. I don't even know if they count as arrows. They're
Mm.
basically swords. They're shooting swords at you that
Arrow
the game has
swords.
decided to call arrows.
Okay.
And if any of those touch you, you are immediately knocked off. And you have to go up this long, buttress plank like to get up this castle, and then you got to fight them. And it is it is it is bad news. It
It's
is
a whole
just
deal.
yeah. And I managed to make it through this archer section in 2 tries, which I've my favorite thing about playing Dark Souls has been I've had either some miraculous luck or maybe I'm just pretty okay at video games with some sections where the chat's just like, oh man, this fucker's gonna get it. Oh, this is where he breaks. This is it. He's not gonna. This is gonna be an hour here, and then I got through it in 2 tries, which I felt pretty good about. And so I made it through most of that section, and then I'm at the boss of Honorlando, which is another famous boss or
Hmm.
famous section within that game that people get pretty uh, excited for, at least in the sense that they're excited to watch me be upset, because you have
Right.
2 characters. Normally in Dark Souls, you want to have a 1v1 battles as much as possible, and the bosses up until this point have always been 1v1 battles, and
Mm.
now you have 2 characters, one who is a big fat guy who's got a huge hammer, who's doing a lot of area of effect stuff to screw with you, and then you have this really quick guy running around. And
Hmm.
so I briefly encountered them last night at around 12:30 as I was turning off my stream and realizing this was going to be probably a whole hour on its own figuring these guys out. But
Mm.
yeah, it's testing my soul. Dark Souls is testing my soul.
I mean,
And
that's kind of what it's meant to do, right? It's sort of a benchmark to see how much you can actually take as a player of video games.
I mean, it absolutely is. But I will say, one of one of the bosses I faced earlier this week, one called the Stray Demon, which is in the opening area of Dark Souls. There's a way to revisit that area later in the game and fight a similar boss, one that's similar to the first boss that you fight in the game in the tutorial section. Um, and he handed my ass to me for like a good 30 minutes, and it seemed like one of those moments where like, well, I'll just have to come back to this later in the game. But I kept going back to the battle. I kept looking at why I was dying, figuring out that what, actually I think there is a way that if I just don't screw up as much, which is much easier than it sounds, I think I can actually take this guy out.
Hmm.
And when the time that I managed to do that was so exhilarating. The adrenaline was as high as I've ever felt in either the scariest film or the scariest video game I have ever had. Like, it's just my hands were jittery. I had to put the controller down. It's an unbelievable feeling when you sort of surmount some of these crazy moments in that game where it just seems like there's no way I'm going to be able to do this, and that every time you die, you just examine, why did I die? How much of that was maybe I'm just not prepared for this? How much of that was I just screwed up something very obvious because I got greedy? And that was a situation where, every time I died, I just tried to examine what I was screwing up. And at the end of it, every time I was getting hit was just because I was like, oh, I'm going to get one more hit in. Instead, just like settling for the 2 that I could reliably get. And I beat it and just, yeah. Like, I literally cheered for myself. And that was That was not for the cameras. I was happy for myself.
Oh,
Yeah, it
I
was
like
great.
it when you're happy. I like it when
No,
you're excited for yourself.
I know, me too.
Yeah.
Also, screw this guy Flake83 that keeps invading each of my games that I kindle a bonfire. Screw that guy. When you come across checkpoints in the game, they're called
Mhm.
bonfires, and if you kindle them, that allows you to have more health items at once. Normally, you can have 5, and if you kindle the bonfires, you can have 10. But when you do that, you become human. In most of
Mm.
the game, you're an undead, so when you're human, I'm not sure. I think you're more powerful, or have more health, or something. But anyway, when you do that, you also open yourself to an invasion from another player character.
Mm.
And in my game, there is clearly someone who watches every single stream, and every time that I kindle a bonfire, that guy comes in and screws with me. And the last time he did it, I refused to let him have the satisfaction of killing me, so I just jumped off a cliff.
That's that's
I could
really
see
dark.
I could see him in the distance. I could see him in the distance, and I just said, "No, not this time, Flake 83. Not this time." It's no big deal because when you die, like the souls that you've collected, which is what you use to level yourself up and buy items, they just show up in a green blob
Sure.
where you die. So you just go back there and grab it. But damn that guy.
But just the
Every single
notion
time.
of just committing suicide to get away from a level of torment that is just unstoppable and, unyielding. It's really
Yeah,
dark. It's a really dark thought. Just throwing that out there.
I know. Well, my wife's gone on playing this game for 4 hour stretches every night for the past week. My mind's going to weird places.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And I have to
Oh,
deal
that's
with Games
terrible.
Windows Live every night, so that's its own nightmare.
That's a fair point. God, yeah, I keep forgetting that thing still exists.
Not for very long, though. I think it shuts
Yeah.
down in July.
Woohoo!
Anyway. And most games are getting it stripped out, but something tells me that Dark Souls won't have it stripped out, and the community will have to figure that out or something. That port of the game is not very good.
I'm not surprised.
Anyway, I didn't play anything. I didn't play anything else this week. That's
That's
all I
about it.
did. That's all I
Yeah,
did.
I got Broken Age sitting here ready to go for this weekend, and then I might have a copy of Octodad floating around that I might be getting into here at some
Oh,
point. But
that
that's
comes
about
out
all
on the
I've been
30th.
playing so far.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's transition to news. There is some stuff going on. Might as well start with the big headline from last night. Normally on Giant Bomb, we do not talk about financials for game companies. Just don't think it's that interesting. Ends up making. I'm not a financial analyst, so
Yeah.
the idea that I'm going to sit and proselytize to a company and explain this is what you should do to turn around your business, just not that interesting. It's why we don't publish NPD numbers. Like, if you want to have number battles, go do it in the forums, go do it in other websites. Just not interested in having that conversation on our site. But
Certainly.
but but
But
what Nintendo did last night slashing its forecasts, I think, is this has less to do. I mean, it has everything to do with numbers, but
hmm
there is a larger conversation to be had about what this means for the company going forward. Basically, Nintendo was estimating that by its fiscal year end of March 31st, they were going to have shipped 9 million Wii U units, and instead they've slashed that to 2.8.
which is a
And
big slash.
yeah,
It's very large.
and their projections are also interesting. So the 3DS, I believe, according to NPD, was the number one selling console in North America last year. So that sounds good, right? Well,
hmm
Nintendo has forecasted that it's going to sell less units this year than it did last year, despite the fact that as hardware matures and it gets cheaper, usually you expect that it's going to sell more units. So Nintendo, for whatever reason, is feeling pessimistic about the 3DS, or is, I guess, trying to lower expectations, because I think everyone knew this 9 million number was crazy, and that Super Mario 3D World was not going to set everything on fire. I almost said the world.
hmm
Uh, Everything on fire and fix everything for that machine. Like, it's not that it's beyond repairing in terms of being a viable, enjoyable console, but in terms of being a mass market item, it does appear that that time has passed, and that Nintendo doesn't have a single game to solve that, which has kind of been Satoru Iwata's promise all along that it just takes one game for a platform to take off, which might be true, but it also requires that you deliver that game.
And I mean, if we're being completely honest, Mario should have been that game. Like, there's no as like that game is spectacular. There's no reason why that game should not have been the system seller if that was all it was going to take to get the Wii U going, and it has not been. It has not even been selling that well compared to the number of Wii U units out there, and so I don't think it is about one game at this point. I don't think that they're. I mean, even they could announce, a massive, sprawling, HD Zelda game tomorrow, and I don't necessarily think that would just solve the problem outright.
Well, I think I think 3D World. There's no way it could have solved that problem for Nintendo to be that one game because, if you look at the sales of Super Mario Galaxy, which is a closer analogy of,
Sure.
or a closer analog for 3D World than New Super Mario Brothers, which in New Super Mario Brothers is the one that went on to sell tens of millions of copies. It was one of the few games that people that bought a Wii also bought another piece of software. Buying more
Right.
software was always kind of the problem for the Wii. They had easy times moving that hardware, but harder times selling software. But things like Wii Fit, New Super Mario Brothers, those games sold to everyone. Galaxy sold well. I'm not saying it sold poorly, but
Yeah.
it didn't sell in nearly the numbers or nearly the volume that New Super Mario Brothers did. And I think 3D World was more along the lines of appealing to the hardcore, despite the fact that Nintendo was pushing the multiplayer aspect of it in the way that New Super Mario Brothers had. So I think that game, pushing that out as the savior in that way was disingenuous on Nintendo's part if they were really thinking that. And they haven't had a Nintendogs, they haven't had a Brain Age, they haven't had something that is fundamentally different from anything out there that inspires people to want to pick up their hardware and their hardware alone in order to play that. And that's how much you put that on them is tough because that's basically saying it's kind of the same criticism that's leveled against Apple is that how come you don't revolutionize the entire world every 3 years? Well,
Right.
because that's tough. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes it is about iteration, and sometimes that iteration is what leads to those moments. But you can't strike gold every single time. It's just that Nintendo seems to be on a particular drought that is hurting them from all angles, where the 3DS is kind of doing okay relative to where it was, but is being severely constrained by changing habits in the market, the fact that most kids happen to have iPhones and iPads and other sorts of devices, and the Wii U, it had a year to figure itself out, but now the oxygen has been taken out of the room by other consoles that are selling just fine.
But and I was looking at, I think it was Pactor this morning was saying that like the 3DS is still selling well technically, but it's about 50% down from where the DS was at about the same time in its lifespan. So it's not necessarily it's not going to be the thing that just will forever keep Nintendo afloat as long as they continue on down this Wii U path. I mean the greater point is that even if Mario 3D World wasn't that savior, I don't think that game exists anymore. I think that fundamentally the conversation about that system has to either be completely reworked, they have to completely reapproach that thing, from a different perspective than what they've been marketing it as thus far, or they're just going to have to fucking throw that thing by the wayside at some point and be like, this is just not going to work. Because as much as I don't want them to, because there are parts of the Wii U that I think are actually pretty rad, and I think that there is potential for them to do very cool things with that system. I mean, the numbers, those numbers are unmistakable. There is nothing you can take away from those numbers and go, well, maybe. It's like, no, that is almost 70% less than what you thought that system was going to sell. The games are not selling. Like, it is those are the worst case scenarios for a console that's been out for a year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, Kid Gloves in the chat points out Mario Kart Wii sold 34 million copies.
Sure.
What? So, I mean, I mean, comparing it to the Wii is tough, right? Like, the idea that you're going to hit that hot a second time around.
Yeah.
Anyone expecting that's crazy talk. I think even if they called it a Wii 2 and continued down motion control, I don't think most of those people would have bought it a second time. You might have convinced some more people, but the iron was not going to strike hot a second time around. But
No.
that disparity is so astronomical, and I don't expect that there's going to be a huge call for Satoru Iwata to step down. I think what's going to probably happen, Nintendo, is that they get one last move before you see major structural and management changes at that company. They turned the 3DS around. Obviously, it's not doing as well as the DS, but I suspect that Nintendo gets kind of like one last sucker punch before someone comes in and just completely changes the way that company does business, which is a really scary prospect. They still have tons of money in the bank. It's not like the company is in dire straits. Like, although this sounds really horrible, Nintendo is not like going under tomorrow or anytime soon. It's just a matter of, is this something that they can turn around from themselves, recognize that the strategy isn't working, and they need to adapt to the market, whether that is following the conventional logic of put your games out on other platforms, which I still don't think that makes sense. But whatever they need to do, I wonder how quickly that happens. Like, do we go into E3 this year and see a third pillar, kind of like we saw the DS, where they throw out something experimental that's kind of a toss away, but that if it takes off, it suddenly becomes the primary platform for them going forward? And that's hard to imagine them doing that this quickly, but are they really going to go on stage at E3? And I guess they won't even have a press conference, so maybe that won't even happen. But whatever they do at E3, it's going to be hard to defend what position they're in.
Yeah. And, I don't remember where I read it, but I read earlier this week that, there's some talk that they may be looking to get into the cell phone market, not necessarily with, porting games or anything, but, creating Nintendo apps, stuff for the Miiverse and whatever else that, people can link their phones to their systems, which sounds like just the ultimate half measure, like the sort of thing like, okay, well, we're going to start dipping our toes into this to see, what we can actually do while still trying to maintain this methodology that, has not necessarily served us terribly well in the last couple of years. But I think you're right. I think it is at the point now where, as much as I love Satoru Iwata, I love his weird, Nintendo Direct messages and everything he does. I feel like someone's going to have to be on the chopping block at some point. And whether he is directly responsible for all of this, I don't know. I wouldn't care to throw accusations around, but I don't think I think we're probably even closer than you do to probably a lot of the familiar faces at Nintendo that we know possibly either being shuffled out or moved around so that it is a different approach, because you can't look at those numbers and go, well, this is salvageable. You have to look at those numbers and go, okay, what do we blow up right now, because holy shit.
Yeah, but Nintendo has not taken that approach in the past. They have not laid off anyone in these quarters and years where they've struggled. Iwata's approach is that he needs those creative people to feel comfort in their jobs so they can surprise people again, which I think is a very cool, very empathetic, very sound strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But it also requires them to deliver, and I think that rope is getting shorter and shorter as we go along. But Nintendo has surprised people before. Nintendo has had their back up against the wall. How many times the call for Nintendo to go third party
mm-hmm.
is, something we've heard before. These days it's called Nintendo should publish on the iPhone. It's just, I never count those guys out. And I want Nintendo to be around. I want them to flourish because they weird everyone out.
Mm-hmm.
And they just, no one knows how to react to them when they have something that's a success. Everyone is just so knee-jerk regarding Nintendo, and when they have something that takes off. We saw motion controls, just the way both Microsoft and Sony responded to that was just very humorous in hindsight. People don't know what to do with that company because they really do come from left field all the time.
Yeah.
So the industry is a better place for a flourishing, crazy, weird, creative Nintendo, and I do really wish them all the luck in the world to deliver on that, because it would really bum me out to see too much change about what they do, because I do think they keep the industry young and honest in a way that it's really easy to get cynical and businesslike about everything that happens, and Nintendo just often is not like that. So it is, it's not usually how I describe how I feel about game companies, but it is kind of painful to see all of this happen, because I do want to see them succeed, because I do think they help the industry in really fundamental ways that we would lose if they didn't continue to play that role.
Yeah, there's no part of me that wants to see Nintendo, in any way disappear from this industry or really, stop being a hardware presence because, like you said, they are an X factor, and it is always better to have someone like that around keeping people on their toes.
Yep. This is gonna be a shorter show than usual because I need to get to the cards offices for Spelunky. So if folks want to start jumping in the chat and leaving some questions as we go through a couple bits of news, we will start winding down and try and chime in on some of those.
Mm-hmm.
Octodad, Dadliest Catch, coming
Yeah.
out to Steam on January 30th. I think they told us in an email they're aiming for March-ish for
Yes.
the PS4 version. I hope that game is good. I have no idea really what to expect from it. I haven't really played it at the various events that it's been at. Phil Tibitowski, who is one of the not sure exactly what his role is on that development staff, but he works oftentimes out of the cards offices, so he is busting ass to try and get that game together. And I hope it's really cool because it seems really funny. I'd like it to be a good game too.
What
I'm
I
just
played
not
of it,
totally sure of that quite yet.
what I have played of it was genuinely pretty fun and hilarious. Granted, I've only played that game in very small chunks. Like one little level sequence, that same wedding sequence that I think everyone has played a whole bunch of times at this point. But it is. I liked the controls. I liked the way it was designed, and if it can kind of maintain that sort of craziness and unpredictability as it goes along, then that game will be pretty rad. So
yeah.
Last of Us DLC coming on Valentine's Day, which is the perfect time for Last of Us DLC, obviously. I think I'm at the point now where I am finally ready to play a little more Last of Us. I don't know about you, but as I wrote about in my Game of the Year write-up, I had to take some breaks on that game just because of how soul-draining that experience can be at times. But I think I'm ready for some more Ellie, for the continuing adventures of Ellie.
Yeah. I am psyched for more Last of Us. I'm dragging my PS3 out on a semi-regular basis anyway because of The Walking Dead. So that's just I'll just have to keep it out a little bit longer. Because I imagine Walking Dead. Well, I don't know. They've been Telltale's been kind of. I was hoping they'd get better at getting on a release schedule with their games, or at least communicating what their release schedule is. It's been too long since another Wolf Among Us episode has been delivered. And
early February, I think.
Yeah, but it was going to be in December.
Yeah, so it's been 2 months, basically.
Going to be January, and now it's February. And it'll probably come out in February, but, it doesn't feel very episodic when, HBO doesn't delay a new episode of Game of Thrones because the CG's not done.
Right.
And I get, it's episodic in quotes, and most people should just wait till the whole season's done, but it's frustrating. Anyway, I'm looking forward to that, although I can't help but still really want them to port that game to PS4 so I could play it again and do it that. But that's not happening, or at least it's not happening yet, so we'll see. But yeah, I'm looking forward to playing that. Playing as Ellie should be interesting. I'm curious to see how what kind of weird situations they put you in this time, especially because this is a prequel. It takes place before the events of The Last of Us. Now, which makes me wonder.
A more playful Ellie is what they keep saying over and over again.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder how they're going to handle that mechanically, like in terms of how you engage with the enemies. Is it going to be more stealth-based? Because part of The Last of Us, she comes in kind of a hardened character. Obviously, she's seen a lot of shit, but it's not till I don't feel like spoiling that game yet, but it's not till later in the game that she really becomes comfortable with killing, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering how they're going to handle that with something that happens well before she kind of goes through that maturation process.
New RBI baseball's happening.
Yeah, that's weird. And they're developing it internally?
Yeah. So I have no idea how long this has been in the works. I have no idea much about what this is going to actually be, except for what platforms it's on. But yeah, so I guess Major League Baseball straight up decided that they were not cool with the idea of there being no baseball game whatsoever on Xbox and other platforms because 2K's out. They are no longer doing MLB. That means that the only console baseball game left is MLB The Show, which is Sony exclusive.
Right.
So I have to imagine that the league probably knew this for a while, that 2K was not going to renew that license, which meant that they probably a while back probably contracted someone to do this. But again, I have no idea what this is actually going to be because RBI baseball has not existed since like what, the 32X. So who knows what the hell that will actually be like conceptually and in execution. But I am thrilled to see at the possibility of seeing what something, published by the fucking Major League Baseball would actually be.
Yeah, are they going to go for? I can't imagine they would call it that without trying to invoke some of the spirit of the old game, right? Like they're not going to make a sim. I can't imagine. Especially that announcement said like it's coming to current, next gen, and mobile platforms. So if they're developing a game like that, my guess is that they're going to go for some, RBI 2.0, which we know how often that works out.
Mm-hmm.
But
very often, obviously.
But who wouldn't want that? So that would be rad. Let's see. Titanfall invites, alpha invites going out to some Battlefield 4 players, which I'm jealous of. I am psyched for that game. I am psyched.
Yeah, but keep in mind, you would have had to suffer through lots of Battlefield 4 problems to get to that, so that is sort of like a weird,
Oh yeah, I'm not that. I'm not a huge. I don't have a huge amount of interest in participating in alphas or betas for games.
Sure.
I'm just playing that game. That game's not that far off. I can wait till March, and I have to imagine that Microsoft would be crazy if they don't have their Twitch stuff in by the time that Titanfall ships.
That would be the time, you would think.
I have to imagine that is their self-imposed deadline because Titanfall is going to move units. I would not be surprised if that pushes the Xbox One kind of toe-to-toe with the PS4. I know PS4 has Infamous coming out and Drive Club's not that far, but I don't think those are big hardware movers. Titanfall is a hardware mover type of game, and man, they'd be crazy if they didn't have their streaming integration in there by then.
It would be a real bummer, and it would show a shocking lack of foresight if that came to pass. But I'm with you. I imagine that has to be the case.
Yeah.
That's all I got news-wise.
Yeah, and just briefly mention Ubisoft's publishing next-gen Tetris. Hooray!
Next-gen Tetris. I cannot think of 3 words that mean less together. So
you're right. I will say one last thing I want to mention because I think I want to write about it sometime soon is IO Interactive, the developers of Hitman and Kane and Lynch, put out a letter that kind of described what their aims are for the next Hitman that they're actively developing. And it's not so much about the fact that IO wrote that letter, but it's a pattern of things that Square Enix has been encouraging their developers to do, which is to write open letters to their community announcing these new games in a not very splashy way, but one that acknowledges they're coming because it's obvious they're going to make another Hitman, another Tomb Raider, another Deus Ex. Just getting that part out of the way and then just kind of communicating with the audience. I think that's awesome. Like the industry has so much secrecy regarding obvious things that are going to happen. It makes no sense to pretend that you're not making a new Hitman game or a new Deus Ex game or a new Tomb Raider. So I just think it's really cool. It's like they didn't make a big thing about it, which is also why it's great. But they're clearly making a pattern of, and they did it with Sleeping Dogs as well, the Triad Wars or whatever they're calling it. They're announcing these very obvious sequels, acknowledging the base that hey, this stuff's coming, teasing a little bit. But I think it's really cool.
I think it directs the chatter in a really smart way because it's one thing to have a bunch of people speculating on what your studio is even doing at all. Are you, in the case of, especially considering the way developers have been shutting down left and right, radio silence could mean any number of different things these days. So it's in some respects, it's good just to kind of get the message out there that, hey, we are actively working on this, on a new game in this franchise that you love. Also, we are totally still here, still staffed up, still doing our thing. And it also, it focuses the chatter in a way so that it's not just a million people on your message boards going, when are you going to talk about this? What is this? What are you doing? And saying, okay, cool, now we know what this is. It buys you time. It gets people talking about the new game. It lets you interact, on a sort of, very high-level feedback kind of sense with your fans about what you're doing. It's the way companies should have been doing this forever, man. It's always driven me fucking crazy how stupid and secretive developers are, especially about sequels to known franchises. It's like, come on, what proprietary thing are you trying to hide from the fact that you're making another Uncharted game or you're making another Hitman game, etc. It's just nonsense.
Yeah. I guess the last thing I'll mention, news-wise, and I think we're going to wrap it up because there weren't a ton of questions, is Outer Lands, which is a Kickstarter being run by a bunch of friends of mine over at Area 5. Those guys came up with the One Up show. They're trying to do a 6-part documentary series that, the term Outer Lands comes from sort of stories outside of the mainstream that normally gets covered in games, and it looks kick-ass, and encourage folks to check that out because I would love to see that happen. And they seem well on their way, so I don't think they're going to need much help. But if you were a fan of the One Up show, if you're a fan of One Up, which certainly influenced a lot of the DNA of Giant Bomb, those guys are off doing something that looks pretty damn cool. I think with that we're gonna bring this earlier show to an early close. What are you working on this week? What are you up to?
So I'm gonna play through Broken Age this weekend, and I'm gonna start in on Octodad, which I think I'm gonna end up reviewing here at some point once the embargo comes around for that. But other than that, I have a couple of Bombastica entries that I have downloaded games and begun playing through again to kind of refresh myself on, and those should go up over the next couple weeks. Other than that, and Power Bombcast next week.
I was going to say, people are asking about Power Bombcast and if you and Rory are going to do another movie podcast.
So we started another movie podcast again this week, and then the computer crashed again this week. The good news is that we were able to salvage the audio from that. We just have to do the other half of the podcast probably on Monday or Tuesday next week. So that is coming. We are doing that.
Cool.
So double podcasts coming from New York in the relatively near future, so look for those soon. What do you got?
Well, my wife comes back on Monday, and I've got thankfully football is only on Sunday, so I'm going to try and continue my quest through Dark Souls. I'm trying to get through as much of that as possible before I have to, spend my time with my wife. Like, that's what? Come on.
What the fuck, man? Come on. What are you doing?
Being responsible and a human being. So
that
I'm trying
is
to
the
get through
worst thing you can do.
Trying to get through. I'm mostly just like have a singular focus on Dark Souls, so I can finish that, and then I want to play Broken Age. I want to play Banner Saga, but it's like I'm on a roll with Dark Souls, and a lot of Dark Souls builds on your previous experience and sort of rote memorization of like animation systems. So just kind of pushing through that and trying to get through as much of that as I can, so I can get Dark Souls out the door. So I'm going to be doing that, and folks can continue to watch my stream on my personal Twitch. And personal YouTube channels where that stuff is archived if they'd like to see me look like a total idiot in that game, which happens all the time. With that, I'm going to bring this to a close. Can tune back in about 40 minutes. We might be a little behind. I got to walk over to the Cards Against Humanity office to get set up with microphones and stuff like that. But we're going to be spelunking with Dave Lang, that horrible monster, supposedly plays Spelunky. So him and Max Temkin are going to join me today, and hopefully we can beat Chris Remo and watch Dave Lang cry in the mines of Spelunky. So, and also we will have a show on Monday where we'll be joined by Depression Quest's Zoe Quinn. She'll be with us for our Monday show, which is awesome. We were very glad to have her, and I'm starting to book other guests along the way. Sounds like we might have Jen Frank on the show in the near future as well. So lots of cool folks. I've reached out to some others, just kind of getting scheduling settled down. But lots to come. So, Alex, I will talk to you on Monday.
Oh.